Hi, my name is Hannah Jane Pritchett, current UA GISD Master's student. Welcome to the University of Arizona GISD podcast. Today, our hosts are Jennifer Mason and Yoga Korgaoker. We will be talking with Rich Simpson, a solution engineer at ESRI. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the University of Arizona GISD podcast. I am Jenny Mason, an assistant professor of practice here in the geography department, and I'm with Yoga Korgaoker, who is also a new assistant professor of practice with me, and we are interviewing Rich Simpson today, an solution engineer at ESRI. Thank you for joining us, Rich.
Thanks for having me.
So we'll jump right into it. Rich, if you could tell us a bit about your background as a solution engineer at ESRI and what that position entails. And then I think you have a presentation that you can jump right into to tell us about the ArcGIS Indoors environment.
Sure, yeah. So my background started, I actually started in the military, serving 8 years now in the Army National Guard. When I started at college, I really didn't have a path of what I wanted to do, so I utilized some skills that I had from my military training and land navigation and converted that into understanding about geography and how we interact with our given space and the world around us. So that's how I got interested in the world of geography and GIS. And so throughout my course of time at Westchester University outside of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, I earned my bachelor's degree in urban environmental planning with a focus in GIS, and then I earned my master's right afterwards in geography. And so afterwards, I was, as a student, I actually took up an internship within our department, in our facilities department, and that allowed me to have a blended experience with the geography and GIS and understanding of how spatial databases work, and integrated that in with facilities management and operations. And so as a student, I was working towards cutting edge technology on the GIS side of things and how it could relate to an everyday workplace and facilities management solution. And from my work, I actually got interested in working for ESRI and being in that cutting edge technology, which led to my eventual internship for the ArcGIS Indoors team within the smart city sector. And so my overall role now as full-time is for a solution engineer, and what I do primarily is focus on building a technical enablement base for indoor mapping and facilities GIS. And I focus on the product for ArcGIS Indoors. And so my focus now, it's transitioning roles a little bit, is primarily in the higher education space. And so I focus primarily on indoor campus mapping at higher ed institutions in order to enable smart campus mapping solutions.
I have a quick question before you talk more about ArcGIS Indoors. A lot of the people I meet that do GIS didn't actually know what it was before they went into it. And I'm actually curious, because you started with GIS early on in your degree, or, as your first degree as a focus. How did you discover GIS or know what it was?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my understanding of GIS was obviously very limited before I went to college. I started in one of my general ed classes was a urban planning class. And so I understood how it related to urban planning and your development of a smart city infrastructure. And that's where I kind of got the introduction to what GIS is and how it could be applied to, your national government scale, to state government, to city government, and local understandings of community engagement. So.
Okay, Rich, let's hear about ArcGIS Indoors. It seems like a pretty cool platform, and I'm very excited to hear about that.
Sure, absolutely. So ArcGIS Indoors started from the understanding that there was a need for a scale of management within a building space. And so with the birth of ArcGIS Indoors, it allowed us to develop a system that can pull in various different information models together, whether it be an asset management software, a work order management software, or a incident management software. And people were able to view this on a spatial scale. But what it ended up looking at for a development into COVID, and as COVID-19 started taking a foothold in how we were operating in day-to-day life and how we were navigating spaces, a lot of individuals were, sheltering in place, but those facilities maintained, right? So, you still had those buildings that needed to be had service maintenance in them, as well as trying to plan for how you're going to bring people back into that campus space. And so that's really what developed from your COVID-19 solutions, right? And so as we're looking at returning to the workplace, we're looking at how we can additionally operationalize that space in order to keep a safe environment. And so operational support and helping out with inspection and workflows, as well as like cleaning services and scheduling cleaning times, and making sure that cleaning schedule is maintained at the same point, as well as space management. And we're looking at office spaces, especially in open office configurations where a lot of different areas are looking at, common areas, and this open space planning really allows for a unsafe environment when you're looking at how close desk spaces are, and so we started developing solutions as to how to separate those areas and to maintain that 6-foot social distancing between office spaces. And we're also looking at solutions for your disease monitoring. So if you have individuals and allow them to submit a survey maybe once a week to say a status update as to how they're feeling that week, or if there's any conditional update that may be happening and they realize they're starting to come in contact with people that have maybe had the COVID-19 virus, they can now plan for their return to the workplace and saying, well, I'm out of the workplace for now 2 weeks and going back into work from home status, right? So now you're building occupancy. You can understand how many people are going to be in that space at a given time. And if there are individuals that may have had contact with someone who has COVID-19, looking at indoor tracing and contact tracing and seeing how those people may have interacted and what spaces they may have interacted with, or what systems of assets they may have interacted with, common assets. You can all take a look at that information on one scale in order to effectively help to return your workplace back to the environment. And this is heavy in higher ed institutions. As we're looking at classrooms that are taking that digital approach, you still have some classes that are looking at lab space where you have to have an on-site classroom environment. How do you maintain those class schedules or class sizes if you're diminishing your scale, right? So pulling in that information to really plan out that space and making sure that your students are safe when they're returning to campus. At baseline configurable scale, you can pull in ArcGIS Indoors for your information modeling, right? And so what you're looking at is a publicly accessible web application that individuals can look at and at quick glance can understand everything they need to know about a building space. This is where you can understand their address, any kind of short description, maybe a contact information for a facilities manager that's responsible for that specific building. But you're also able to find vital information for the space of that facility, right? So you can find gross square footage of that facility, and you can actually toggle between different floors to find out how many different floors that facility may have. And as you can see, that map dynamic changes as you toggle between the different floors. But so past the building scale, if you were to zoom in further on our map, you can select a different room, and now you can get information detailed based on who's assigned to that specific office space. If it's a ongoing classroom environment, you can see who may be assigned to that classroom during a given part of the day. A lot of information can be pulled into this system all at once. With this, you can understand anything related to the building space from this toggle feature, right? And Along with that, if you wanted to get directions to that location, say that this is one of my professors, I need to meet with them, I'm going from our cafe, we can then get a turn-by-turn routable direction to that location. You may notice that you have dotted lines versus solid lines. The solid lines is designated as the space that you're currently on, and then the dotted line is any space that's below that vertical Z value or horizon. So as we're looking at how mobility is being affected, we can plan for, in the space of COVID-19, to designate these areas as primary or secondary pathways. So we're able to separate your pathways for your hallways in order to allow for students to have that one directional flow down a hallway, right? So that's keeping that cross traffic away from very close proximity areas in an indoor space. We're actually able to view this in not just 2D, but 3D as well. This is going to give you a general overview of your building facility at a greater scale. So now you have a really fundamental understanding of that building space as it relates to how you may be navigating around your facilities. We're also finding that particularly in the higher ed institutions, integrations in with your calendars or Office 365, whatever you may be using, we can use this to pull in daily calendar invitations from your own schedules, right? So if this is a student, they can now have their calendar classes all the way through their day, and then they can navigate to those spaces. So if you don't know where your next classroom is, imagine first-year student, right? Don't know where, you're not very familiar with that space. You may have attended one on-site introduction to the campus space several months before you started classes. This is a way of understanding how you can get to the next class, right? And so you're not worried about if you're making it on time or what your professor's going to think about you if you show up late on the first day, right? First impressions mean everything, and so you're able to utilize this as a tool so that you can make it to that class on time. So these are just some baseline configurable details for the ArcGIS Indoors system and being able to understand how you can interact with different spaces. So if I was to go ahead and turn on our retail and services, I can now see where our Redlands Cafe is, or if you were to have different food trucks around the area, they could also have a navigated point of interest as well. So you're finding different assets that you may be looking at throughout a day-to-day space. I can't imagine any time that I was walking through a building space like, oh man, I wish I could find a refillable water station. Now you're able to pull that information in and find out exactly where that may be located. Everything that you've seen here in this web application can be utilized in a mobile device as well. With integrations with indoor positioning systems, you can also allow for mobile device users to have a more accurate positioning based on how their facilities are laid out. With this IPS, you can get very detailed information based on the inside of your buildings, and adding that blue dot experience to an indoor map allows users to locate themselves within any kind of facility and navigate around to any different point of interest that may be on that map. So as you can see through a mobile device, as I'm navigating down a staircase, our mobile device is connected to those indoor positioning systems, and it's changing that map interface as I navigate down the space. So we changed from the second floor down to the first floor because our indoor positioning system picked up exactly where we are in that location. And as I navigate around this space, you can get a directional view of where you're at. You can also explore different assets or points of interest that may be closest to you. So if I hit the Explore panel, I can now pull up the closest entryway to me. I can then look at that and say, I want to share it with another student and say, hey, meet me at this entranceway. I can share that through either email or a text message, or I can save it for a future location and say, this is the building that I normally am going to be occupying. I want to be able to save this as well. We can integrate it in with our calendar feed on the mobile device, so you can find that classroom and find that next classroom that you have to go to. And then it allows you to have that turn-by-turn routable direction within an indoor space. So we're bringing all of those GPS capabilities into an indoor space from that indoor positioning system. And so we can utilize that to even share our location with another colleague as well. So on the go, I can now find my colleagues or students, other fellow students that are in that space throughout the campus, so that you don't even have to look for where they are, you know where they are. So with this accessibility, bringing it back into how we're responding with COVID-19 allows us to take that information, and with that ability to opt in to sharing your location, we can also pull information from historical tracks as well. So if you have individuals that are maybe moving around their campus space, they can see other historical tracks based on where they have been. And so when we're talking about COVID-19 and how individuals may have interacted with other people, we can get a proximity alert and saying, me as an individual may have had showing signs of symptoms, and we can look back at my historical data set and say, within the last 5 days, I've come in contact with another individual on our campus. And by understanding proximity and how many times I maybe have interacted with that individual, we can now get a more proactive response for that other student or faculty member and saying, you need to go get yourself checked or self-quarantine until we understand the situation in a full extent. Along with this, we can also understand further in depth those cleaning schedules. So if I have started showing signs and symptoms of COVID-19, I can look back at my historical data set from 5 days prior in order to understand what classrooms or assets I may have interacted with. This can define how we are prioritizing those cleaning schedules in the future.
Rich, how close do people have to get, or like how large is this buffer when it's assuming people came into contact, and like how accurate as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so depending on how the indoor positioning system has been enabled, we see accuracy utilizing Bluetooth beacons to be the most highly accurate, and so that can get down to at least a sub-2 meter level, which is fairly accurate when you're talking about getting a 6-foot social distancing buffer. That's usually the buffer that we're utilizing in this case. And with this, you allow for individuals to pull that information into an operations dashboard, right? So only people that have the access to this information can see this. So this isn't like a publicly available information data set, especially when you're concerning those HIPAA violations or anything like that. This is locked behind a single sign-on secure server, and then additionally assigned to a group user that only one person may have access to in the health and safety services sector. But with looking at this, we can see those different points of contact that they may have interacted with. And now we're able to get that detailed information about the particular office space or a classroom that they may have been in. Now we're able to understand and get that proactive maintenance or proactive response rather for that individual in their space.
So Rich, you talked about indoor positioning systems. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I think most of us are aware about GPSs and how it works outdoors, but I think the indoor concept is still very new to us. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Let me see if I can actually find a good slide that illustrates that point. So indoor positioning systems are really interesting to look at and how you're interacting with that indoor space. And so there's 3 main ways that you can get your positioning, right? And the most common one that everybody knows about is GPS signal, right? That's how you get your standard blue dot whenever you're using any kind of navigation application on your mobile device. And as you move around, you can see exactly where you're at, and oftentimes you have the ability to get that fan view to see in what direction you're looking at as well, right? But with integrations that we have now with Bluetooth as well as Wi-Fi infrastructure, we can utilize that information to get that accuracy into an indoor scale. And so as many people know, if you're utilizing a GPS signal and then you walk into a building space, that signal either becomes disabled or significantly less accurate whenever you're in an indoor space. With indoor positioning systems through either Bluetooth or Wi-Fi infrastructure, we can allow for that accuracy to be heightened in an indoor space. This also allows you to have access to a vertical value as well. So as you're navigating around that space, or you may be taking an elevator or a stairway or transition, or even just a ramp, you can have that indoor positioning system lock into your position to let you know what level you are on. And integrations in with our map interface for the mobile device transitions that map based on whatever floor you may be on. So it knows where your location is and changes it as you interact with the mobile device.
So Rich, I have a question somewhat related to this. So we're talking about, transitioning to indoor spaces, and, as a large campus and every university, we have multiple buildings and outdoor areas that we traverse as we move across campus. Mm-hmm. So how would it work, if we want to do contact tracing as students, faculty, staff move around campus, how does it work as we move between indoor and outdoor environments to get from point A to point B? And, how's the accuracy? How is that possible? How does it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the indoor positioning that we're talking about doesn't have to be specifically one deployment. So it can be a combination of all three of these, either through Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, or GPS. And what we find typically on higher ed institutions is that their Wi-Fi system is very robust, right? And so you have access to a Wi-Fi access point typically all around your entire campus. Now, there may be some areas where that frequency or accessibility is limited. And with that, we can then augment with Bluetooth technology. So if it's in an indoor space, you can deploy a low energy Bluetooth beacon, and all that beacon does is just send out a signal for that mobile device to understand where it is, right? So it's not collecting any information, it's not harboring any kind of personal information from your mobile device. It's just typically using it as a sounding beacon so that you understand that positioning. When you're navigating through an indoor and outdoor space, that transition space can be utilized from GPS. So as you walk out of a building, and the strongest accuracy that you have is a GPS signal, then your GPS signal will take over as you traverse between different buildings. For the accuracy, like I said, the Bluetooth accuracy in an indoor space is the most accurate that you can get with a sub 2 meter. Wi-Fi, depending on the level of complexity of your Wi-Fi network, we can see typically between 3 to 5 meter accuracy, but when you have that integration with the GPS, you get significant accuracy as well within an outdoor space. For the contact tracing that we're looking at, this is a built system just for the campus itself, right? So when you are either leaving that campus space, we have a geofence set up that it's no longer tracking that device. So there's no personal information or any kind of privacy concerns are being addressed as you leave that campus space. And again, this is information, if you wanted to have it logged historically for that COVID-19 response, this is information that you are opting into giving. So we're not just taking information from you and taking in personal information. We're heavily securing that information for privacy concerns as well. So you would have to go into the mobile device and opt into sharing your location based on that.
So Rich, related to the security concerns and opting in, will the users have any say on what information gets shared even when they opt in? Are there levels of information sharing, or how that's translated on the other side as well? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when you have access to the ArcGIS mobile device, you are a named user on there. So you're sharing a username, and typically that username can be anything that you want it to have. For the information that you're sharing, it would simply just be that username associated with the tracing and the device as it moves around the campus, right? So that's the only information that's being housed. If you decide that you don't want to opt into the service, then there is no information that's being tracked from that. So Along with that, in the enterprise deployment that it comes with for ArcGIS Indoors, you have to have a single sign-on login for it. So it's secured behind a server. We do offer multiple different deployments, whether it be on premises or an enterprise cloud deployment, and typically that's behind another secured server as well. So privacy concerns are definitely a huge worry, and so we're taking that into the highest accountability as we can.
So Rich, question to follow up with that. So if there's not any individual like identifiable information, I could just call myself some random name. How does it work? So say I test positive. Do I put that in the app? Administrators get it, and then they tell, I don't know, whatever the random names are to the other people and it pushes through the app? Or how does it work if they can't identify who that person is, as well as the other people, to let them know that they've come into potential contact or exposure?
Yeah, so there would have to be at least some level of accountability, right? And so looking back at how you're sharing your information, this can be, the beauty of the system is that it can be configured to deliver any kind of information that the user may want, right? And so if your backend office administration for health services department wants to know who that individual is, they can require that the individual utilizes their real name, or maybe a student's student number or student ID. All of this information can be configured based on what the university determines is the best course of action in order to maintain that safe space. And when you're thinking about returning back to that campus life, right, I would take the stance as wanting to opting into sharing my location only to make sure that I am being safe. So whether it's, making sure that I'm not spreading something that I could have had, it's also making sure that I'm maintaining safety as being in contact with someone else who may have been sick, right? So it works both ways in that aspect.
Rich, can you talk about some of the data requirements for ArcGIS Indoors? Is this data that's already been processed and prepared for it? Can there be real-time data that can be used in ArcGIS Indoors as well, especially now since everything's happening so fast? That data needs to be moved through the system fast as well. Can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so how you get started with ArcGIS Indoors is through, the most common that we see is through CAD files. So with access to CAD files, we can pull that information in, and our system allows you to batch convert CAD files into GIS layers, which is beautiful. And when you have the access to those GIS layers and CAD floor plans into GIS layers, you can now see that indoor floor plan. With that, you can publish that map feature and to be used through a customizable, or rather a configurable web, mobile, or even a kiosk application. So you get started with the CAD files, but then integrating in other systems is a huge capability of our system, right? So you can pull in information from an asset management software. You can pull in information from a work order management software. So if you wanted to, as a student, if I'm walking around the campus and I have the mobile device and I see that there's an issue, maybe a pipe is a bursting or some kind of issue with flooding or plumbing, I can now pull up my mobile device and report that incident. So our facilities operations crew now knows that there's an incident that is ready to turn to a critical state. And so they're able to respond to that in the fastest way possible. So that's where you get that real-time capabilities. Additionally, if you have any real-time sensors, we can pull that information in as well. We see universities utilizing real-time occupant sensors or people counters as people walk in and out of buildings. We can pull that information in as well to see what the total occupancy of a building is supposed to be versus what is actually being utilized. And this is heavy in the space management sector where you're determining maybe in a particular classroom, if you're looking at a student size and the classroom is allowing for 28 students, but continuously throughout the course of a day, it's filling up with 30 or 35 students, we now understand that class size needs to be moved to a different classroom to accommodate the amount of students that's in there. Looking at how we're responding with COVID, that information can be pulled in to utilize and see how many people are actually occupying a certain space. So if we have a collaboration area that utilizing a 6-foot social distancing buffer between each individual student, we can determine that if a space is designed only for 28 people and there are, with the 6-foot social distancing buffer, you obviously can't fit that many people in that space. You can only fit 7. Utilizing that real-time information about how many people are actually utilizing that space could be a determining factor as to how you're separating different groups of people and making sure that everybody's maintaining that so safe distance for the campus.
So I also have a question to follow up on the data that you're talking about. This is really like rich data. We're not only talking about spatiotemporal data over numerous days that we're recording, but also having to make sense of all the additional attributes that are tied to it. Well, we have obviously the z-value tied to the location, but it's more information about the user and all of that, and you've showed us some of the attributes. How does someone, say administration says, this is great, I want to utilize this both for planning, but also for retroactively looking back, if we're just talking about COVID, for instance. How do they, who can actually do this? Are we talking about having to hire a GIS professional? What kind of training? How easy is it to say, okay, now we want to plan out all the classes in the fall? Do they just click a couple buttons and it's that easy? Or we find out Jenny Mason has COVID, I need to go look now for the past 10 days where she might have exposed others. And I'm just trying to think from the administrative side how difficult this is for someone to now go make sense of the data for planning and retroactive purposes.
Yeah, so in that aspect, the situation for getting your CAD data converted over into GIS layers is primarily where we see that level of uplift, right? And so what we find is, though there are CAD standards that people are supposed to adhere to as they draw their building facilities, sometimes those drawings aren't exactly to the standard that they're supposed to be at. And so we spend some time doing a little bit of configuration to get it into a schema that fits correctly, but it's generally not that hard to do, right? And so once you have that up and running and you batch convert it, configuring all these applications is very easy. It's very easy to do. Additionally, if someone wanted to get started with it, we do actually offer 3 different ways of getting started with it. Basically, there's an option for you to just get the software and you do everything yourself as far as batch converting your CAD data or configuring the applications. We also do have an option for where you hold on to the software and you are doing that, but you might need a little bit of help from ESRI. We can also help you out with that as well. We do have some packages that are available for that. But lastly, if you're interested in just getting started with this and you just want us to do all of the work, we do have a turnkey system available for you. So if someone says to me, I need this tomorrow, all right, let's get started with it, and we can handle all of it. As far as managing and looking at that data, the web application, mobile application, these dashboards, once they're configured, are super easy to use and super convenient to be able to pull up all that information all in one spot to see how many work orders do I have currently issued for the facilities that are taking place, how many are being completed on a daily basis. This is really understanding in a full scope of how effective are you as a maintenance operations team, how effective are you at space planning if you understand the occupancy of how students or faculty are interacting with their offices or their campus space in general, right? So this is helping with your space planning. For your wayfinding, how efficient are you at making it between classrooms to classrooms? This is also helping with scheduling, right? And so if you have, I know that my first semester at Westchester University, I had a building, I had 15 minutes between classes and they were on the complete opposite side of my campus. And so every single day I was essentially running between classrooms. Had I known that, that class schedule could have been changed to allow for maybe a closer classroom setting. So it's helping out with the back office, but it's also helping out with students to plan out how their schedules are.
So Rich, I have a slightly off-topic question, but I know that we have potential students that'll be watching this podcast, as well as people who might be wanting to switch their careers and learning about GIS. So what kind of tips do you have as someone who has successfully made it into the GIS industry? If they watch this, they're like, wow, I really love what Rich does. This is amazing. I want to work at ESRI or do something like this. What kind of skills would you say are important? Maybe we're talking soft skills like critical thinking or, skills that you had to specifically train for. But, what kind of tips for someone who wants to kind of have a job like you and do this kind of exciting work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here at ESRI, we utilize the team of teams approach. And so being able to effectively collaborate with other individuals is the key to success, right? And being able to understand where your limitations are and where you can find information easily from another person. So being able to stop and say in a conversation, I'm not too sure about that, but I'm going to find out because I know the person who would know. Being able to ask for help and stopping and realizing this is not my area of expertise, but I will be, happy to help and find someone who may be able to answer the questions that you have. So being open to asking for help is critical, especially in the GIS realm, because there's so much to know. But you always have to have someone as a backup to get to that information, and being able to quickly learn information on the fly as well too. So if you do end up finding that person who has the right answer, really dig further into it and understand what it is that they're explaining, so that you can help to articulate that conversation again in the future if that ever comes up again.
Were there specific technical skills that you think are essential? If someone was saying they wanted to do a position like yours that you trained for, that you feel like would be very important to be able to do your job prior to getting hired?
Yeah, so I do believe that, so my skills on my undergrad skills were taking GIS classes. As a graduate student, I transitioned all of the knowledge that I had and started doing a graduate assistantship and teaching those classes. So I think that the skills for technical ability really are heightened when you are trying to effectively explain what you're doing to another individual. I think that's huge. And I do a lot of that at my current position in enabling other solution engineers in different industries who may have an interest in applying indoor GIS to their specific field. I really am able to fully understand the capabilities of the software when I start to really in-depth apply it to their specific sector. So I think that will really help with the technical knowledge of getting that baseline understanding and then regurgitating that information to develop that full knowledge base.
Thank you, Rich. And I think you make a great point anyway. I think as GIS professionals in a way, even Yoga and I in academia, it's kind of a lifelong learning field, and everything's always changing. So you make some great points and some great tips. And we want to thank you. We're so happy to have ESRI as a partner and be able to use the software that you guys put out and have these connections to have this communication. And so we really appreciate you taking the time, and we're looking forward to seeing ArcGIS Indoors and all the cool things that it can do. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for your time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Rich. Bye.